today.
Like the chairman? Yeah.
Nope. The Democrats will probably come from over there.
Okay.
That's the chairman's office.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
No meander in.
Yeah, the chair would be in the middle. Yes.
Excuse me. Did you touch something?
I don't think you did either. These things are so flippin'.
Judge, good to see you, Mom. Yeah. You happy? I always figured that somebody asked how you are, what they're really saying is, I hope you're good. Absolutely.
Trying to find a place. Ingrid cigars were back. Both days. I went to REI. I only have a place in the back town. They sell 6,000 packages. It's not like a weird trip. You're at the door. Like I went there with $50 years.
Your nameplate is meant not to Kimbo. Great. Miami Pals. Yeah, I'm a Miami Pal. One of the gangs. It's a blessing to see history in making that. Our job. Show people what they can't see on their own.
I'm right there.
Shane. For social disorganization. You're always welcome. I don't know. Okay.
I'm sure my grandfather will find it.
Don't forget about our friends in the back.
What's going on?
The Rules Committee will come to order. This is a sad day. When our founders drafted the Constitution more than 230 years ago, they included a process that could lead to removing a president from office if he or she abused their power. That is what separates America from so many other nations. There are no kings or queens here, and no one is above the law. That process, impeachment, is rarely used because of its seriousness. In fact, this will be only the fourth time in our nation's history that Congress has considered the presidential impeachment process. And in the case of President Nixon, the president resigned instead of facing likely impeachment by the House and removal by the Senate. It is a solemn responsibility. This Congress, with our existing authority under the Constitution and the rules of the House, is in the midst of an impeachment inquiry right now. No one runs for Congress to impeach a president, but we are here today because the facts compel us to be. There is serious evidence that the president may have violated the Constitution. Unlike during the impeachment of President Nixon and Clinton, no special prosecutor has been named to investigate President Trump on this. There is no single report from which this Congress can make a decision whether or not to impeach President Trump on his dealings with Ukraine. That's why the Intelligence Committee has been gathering evidence and hearing testimony. Reasonable confidentiality has been paramount so that accounts couldn't be coordinated and witnesses weren't unduly influenced. It's a process, by the way, that even former Republican Representative Trey Gowdy, who chaired the Benghazi Committee, has endorsed. He said, and I quote, "I think if you're going to have private investigations with unlimited time for questioning and cross-examining witnesses, that's a good thing," end quote. I agree, and I'm proud of our deliberative process so far. Now, as committees continue gathering evidence, they are preparing to present their findings. As we enter the public-facing phase of the inquiry, I introduced a resolution yesterday to ensure a clear path forward. We are marking up that resolution here today. I don't know whether President Trump will be impeached. Only the facts and how we respond to them will dictate that. But I can tell you this. This process determining whether he should be impeached will be open to the public view, just as it should be. Now, I know some Republicans are very resistant to investigating the president at all, but that will not stop the American people from hearing the facts. A group of Republicans even resorted to storming a secure facility to disrupt witness testimony. That's despite the fact that many of those members were already entitled to attend the deposition. So let me tell you, I mean, I believe in civil disobedience. I've even been arrested protesting for what I believe in. I've protested for human rights, and I've protested against gun violence. But endangering our national security and compromising a secure facility is a whole other matter. Bringing cell phones into a secure area and tweeting and recording, I hope we never see anything like that again. But I want to make this clear right at the top of this markup. I appreciate the way members of this committee treat each other with respect and always display professionalism. And that certainly includes our minority and ranking member, Tom Cole. I think the Rules Committee, week in and week out, sets a good example of how members should treat each other. And I hope that tradition continues today. We all feel strongly and we all feel passionately about the matters before us. And I expect that will be reflected in today's proceedings. But I respect everyone, and I appreciate the ranking member's commitment to this institution and to doing what's right, as I do with every member on both sides of the aisle. As much as I disagree with this president and don't like his tweets, his tone, or his policies, I never wanted our country to come to this point. But 5 or 10 years from now, people will ask each of us what we did in this moment. They will ask us what we did when confronted with this crisis. And let there be no doubt that as much as this president flaunts the Constitution, we are going to protect it. We will stand up for the Constitution and defend the rule of law. And now let me turn to our ranking member, my friend from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And just let me begin by frankly reiterating what you said in terms of keeping this process civil and professional and fair and open. I agree with another sentiment you expressed, and that this is a very sad day. It's a sad day for me personally. I certainly, and I doubt anybody here, ran for Congress with the idea that they would ever be involved in an impeachment inquiry. I certainly never thought I would be. I think it's a sad day for the Rules Committee and for the institution of the House of Representatives. You know, we're meeting here today to set forth a process for impeaching a president of the United States. In my view, it's not a fair process, it's not an open process, and it's certainly not been a transparent process. It's been limited and closed, and frankly, I think we're moving toward a preordained result. Over the last month, several House committees have been engaged in what's been called a formal impeachment inquiry, quote, unquote. Of course, there's nothing formal about it other than the Speaker saying so. The House has never voted to conduct such an inquiry, and the committees have operated in the dark without formal authorization on what amounts to nothing more than an expanded fishing expedition. At least today, in my view, the majority is admitting what we all know. That's that the House was not following an appropriate process for impeachment. I do not think the process we're setting forward, frankly, with all due respect to my friend, the chairman, in this resolution is a fair one either. It's not fair to the President of the United States. It's not fair to the people of the United States. The process laid out in the resolution before us is different from the processes used for both President Nixon in 1974 and President Clinton in 1998. Both presidents were given substantially more due process and protections than what the resolution gives to President Trump today. In the case of President Clinton, that was a Republican House of Representatives affording a Democratic President of the United States more due process than the current Democratic House is affording the current Republican president. First, frankly, both Presidents Nixon and Clinton were given the right to have counsel present to review documents and materials presented to the committees, to recommend witnesses, to cross-examine witnesses when appropriate. Counsel for both presidents were fully participants in the Judiciary Committee hearings and were allowed to make arguments. And more importantly, in both cases, the president's counsel's request for witnesses to testify was accommodated. That's certainly not been the case thus far in this process. Today, and in today's resolution, there's no right for President Trump to have counsel in any of the depositions, hearing, or inquiries that have been conducted thus far. So we're well into the process without the president having been given the right to actually participate in it. The resolution includes nothing that would give him that right going forward. On a matter as serious and solemn as this, we cannot leave important factors like the right of counsel to the whim of a committee chair, which is exactly where it would fall under this resolution. Second, in both the Nixon and the Clinton impeachment proceedings, the minority was given the co-equal right to subpoena witnesses and documents. The purpose of this was to ensure that the investigations would be fair, impartial, and bipartisan. Today's resolution differs from the Nixon and Clinton precedents in a key way. The resolution does not provide for co-equal subpoena power. Instead, it grants the minority the right to subpoena witnesses and materials only with the concurrence of the chair, and the requirement that such subpoenas be, quote, deemed necessary to the investigation. That's a heck of a situation when you get to decide what is necessary for an investigation. There was no limitation in the Nixon and Clinton impeachment proceedings that was similar. As a simple matter of fairness, it's important to note that there are no such limitations on the committee chair. If this is truly a bipartisan process, why then is the minority subject to such restrictions on its ability to participate while the majority is certainly not? I think the differences between the procedure and the procedure followed in the past are very clear. Today's resolution fails to give the president the right to due process that Presidents Nixon and Clinton enjoyed, and it fails to preserve the right of the minority to fully participate in the proceedings. This resolution also differs from the Nixon and Clinton resolutions in another key way. Both of those previous resolutions were written in a bipartisan manner and with full consultation with the minority. We were not involved in any way in the construction of the resolution that we are considering today. It was dropped on us with 24-hour notice. This committee has not had a hearing about the procedures and how we should go. We simply are presented with this sort of full-blown out of, or fully made out of whole cloth. This resolution, frankly, again, is not bipartisan and done with full consultation with the minority. was written only by Democrats without even a pretense of consulting Republicans. And I didn't even see a copy of this thing, this resolution, until it was released publicly. Mr. Chairman, we can certainly do better than that and better than we're doing today. When President Nixon, President Clinton were impeached, the process was a collaborative one. The minority was allowed to participate fully and equally. The president was given the right to have counsel present and participating. That preserved the rights of the minority, preserved the rights of the president, and ensured that due process was the touchstone for the House. Without due process and without a fair process that respects minority rights, I do not believe the American people regard this process as legitimate. A legitimate process is one that offers protections for everyone involved, and without those protections, this will be seen as just another partisan exercise, one the majority has been pushing towards since the very first day of the 116th Congress. That's unfortunate, and I hope we can do better than that, but certainly look forward to the hearing today, and we intend to participate as fully as allowed.
Thank you. And I appreciate your comments, and I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you that I disagree with your analysis of the protections and the rights we are affording the President of the United States. But I do feel compelled to just state for the record that if we're going to talk about process, we ought to respect and the constitutional authority of the House of Representatives. And this White House, and it's one of the reasons why we're here, has obstructed our investigations, ignored our duly authorized subpoenas, withheld key documents, prevented witnesses from testifying, and intimidated witnesses. They have tried to disparage members of Congress who are trying to fulfill their responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States. And I just, for the record, will say Article 1 of the Constitution gives the House the right to investigate the President. And we are taking our responsibilities seriously, and that's what this resolution proves that. The measure before the committee is HRes 660, directing certain committees to continue their ongoing investigations as part of the existing House of Representatives inquiry into whether sufficient grounds exist for the House of Representatives to exercise its constitutional power to impeach Donald John Trump, President of the United States of America, and for other purposes. Without objection, the resolution is considered as read and will be open for amendment at any point. Are there any amendments to the resolution?
Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall.
Are we going to have an opportunity to read through the resolution, ask questions of council about it?
If you want,
I don't want to read it just for the purposes of having it on the
read the
record, but I
resolution.
did have some questions about the text and how it was drafted and why it was drafted in certain ways. I know on the budget committee we would go through line by line. We don't do original jurisdiction hearings that.
well, we can go through line by line if you like.
And would there be a council available to answer questions about the draft?
We can do that. I'm sorry. I mean, this is not a hearing; it's a markup. We can go through line by line, and you can offer your amendments, and we can have a discussion based on your concerns. I assume that you're offering amendments.
Well, I do have
Yeah.
amendments, but
I yield to the gentleman from.
So point of order, if we go line by line, will we have to amend to that line at that point?
Yes, you would.
well,
It's by section.
I'm burdened by being primarily a Rules Committee member, and we don't primarily do original jurisdiction. In my time on the Budget Committee, for example, we would read through the budget line by line to answer members' questions about particular line items, and then we would come back and have those amendments done in an order. There are things in here in my decade in Congress that I've never seen done before, and I'm sure there's a good reason for it. But I don't know if I want to take it out or not, if the majority can explain to me why it's in there and how it advantages
The gentleman is recognized, and he may offer his amendment, and we can discuss it, based on what you want to add or what you want to subtract. You may want to reconsider your amendments after you offer them.
I take the gentleman's point,
All right.
and the answer being that we will not read through it, but I will offer the amendments as I have them. I would say, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The gentleman, the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 1 to House Resolution 660, offered by Mr. Woodall of Georgia. Page 1, line 1, strike that and all that follows through page 6, line 16, and
Mr.
insert the
Chairman?
following.
I'd ask permission that the unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read. What I would tell you is it's going
Without objection.
to strike everything except for Section 4 that structures the Judiciary Committee and the impeachment inquiry as the Judiciary Committee would have it done. Mr. Chairman, the reason I was asking about reading through and trying to understand it, I mean, the resolved that all of these committees that are already investigating are going to continue their investigations. I don't understand what that means in the context of moving forward. We're going to authorize folks to continue doing something that we've never authorized folks to do before. What I would say, because I take the chairman's words at face value, he was talking about Republican obstructionism in his opening statement, but he said this will not prevent the American people from hearing the facts. I would say to my colleagues that if we keep the Intelligence Committee section of this resolution intact, the secrecy of that committee will in fact prevent the American people from hearing the facts. What my amendment would do is strike all of the Intelligence Committee language to recognize, as we did in the Nixon impeachment, as we did in the Clinton impeachment, that this is a function of the Judiciary Committee, and include, as the majority has drafted it, the Judiciary section. Now, to be clear, that Judiciary section is not as fair and equitable to the minority as the Clinton Judiciary section was. That's a different argument for a different day. I recognize the majority has the right to allow or limit voices as they see fit. But I would encourage my colleagues, a bifurcated process that continues to happen behind closed doors does nothing to achieve the goals the chairman has laid out. I don't believe the majority has anything to hide, and I'm certain the minority has nothing to hide. And so let's eliminate this ability for the Intelligence Committee to continue operating behind closed doors, move it to the Judiciary Committee, where we have always done that as a nation in the tragic times where this House has chosen to go down that road. And so when, as the chairman proposed, that folks are asking the question 5 or 10 years from now about what we did in this moment, we ensured that we did protect the constitutional prerogatives of Article 1 and of Article 2, such that we could, even in a tragic time, be proud of the way this House operated.
I yield to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I want to speak in opposition to the gentleman's amendment, as thoughtful and as well-intentioned as it is. The first thing that we need to clear up is that everything that has taken place in the investigations by all of the committees in Congress has been perfectly constitutional and perfectly lawful. And you have to look no further than a decision last Friday, October 25th, by the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, Chief Judge Beryl Howell, who said it is solely within the power of the House of Representatives to conduct impeachment proceedings. It is solely within the power of the House of Representatives to design our own rules. And we have the power to get the information that we want in the manner in which we want to get it. So this period of the investigation differs from the Nixon and Clinton investigations only in the sense that there were special counsels in the Department of Justice who did the closed-door deposition phase in those investigations. There were lots of closed-door interviews, depositions, investigative materials being shared and so on in both the Nixon and Clinton investigation, with Archibald Cox in the Watergate case and with Ken Starr with respect to Bill Clinton, and nobody objected to that. This Department of Justice refused to do an investigation into the alleged misconduct and criminal operations of the executive branch of government. Therefore, it was left to the legislative branch to do it. That's precisely what our investigative committees have been doing. And so it is already established that it is perfectly lawful, perfectly legitimate. We continue to recognize its legitimacy as they continue, but it seems to me what you're objecting to is the opening up of the process, because that's what it is now. We are ready to move to an open process where the public will be able to see the witnesses and to get the facts, and everybody will have access to it. So I don't know, or put it this way, I would reject this because it's an attempt to shut down the opening up of the process so the whole public can see precisely what's been taking place behind closed doors. I yield back, Mr.
I
Chairman.
appreciate the gentleman's comments, and I agree with everything he said. So perhaps either I didn't explain my amendment properly, or we're confused about what the underlying legislation does, which is why I was hoping we'd have counsel here to explain the legislation. There is nothing that the Intelligence Committee is authorized to do in this resolution that the Intelligence Committee isn't doing already. The Intelligence Committee isn't opening up to allow the President to come and ask questions in the Intelligence Committee. The President will be completely excluded from the Intelligence Committee procedures. If, to the extent that the majority wants to investigate the President, to the extent the U.S. House of Representatives wants to investigate the President, that's absolutely our constitutional prerogative. My question is, why in an impeachment resolution are we authorizing the investigative process that would traditionally, exactly as the gentleman from Maryland.
I got you, Mr. Woodall. I think I can answer it, but maybe the chair could help too. I believe that the procedural change here is to change the 5-minute rule so that there could be an open hearing and there could be professional staff questioning in an open hearing of the Intelligence Committee. But I'll yield to the chair on that.
Yeah, no, and I would just say that the gentleman's amendment would strike the provision that would require the Intelligence Committee to have an open hearing, but I'll yield to Ms. Torres.
I want to enter for the record HRES 507, which was taken up by the House, which allowed these committees, and it confirmed for these committees to give them the authorization to be able to have subpoena power. This was the beginning, and now that those classified briefings are coming to the end, it is only correct that we move forward with an open process, and I hope that we will continue to come to the House of Representatives for a formal information on how to proceed. So I would like to enter this
Thank you.
for the
Without
record.
objection. I hope the gentleman is not inferring that Republicans on the Intelligence Committee have not been part of the
Not at all.
being there when the depositions were taken.
I would certainly say that the ability to answer questions in the environment that we are currently seeing the investigation take place has certainly been truncated. But I was not. My suggestion is that if this is the official phase of the impeachment inquiry, my friend from California said, isn't it wonderful that the language that Woodall proposes to strike would require that there be at least one public hearing? Folks, if this is the time that we're beginning an impeachment inquiry, this is a time to refuse to allow even one non-public hearing. If this is the time for openness, let us declare that everything will be open going forward, which we do through our colleagues here who serve on the Judiciary Committee.
Yeah. I yield to the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a question from my good friend from Georgia. Under the resolution as it's written, is the president represented in the Judiciary Committee? Does he have the ability to have counsel to cross-examine, to get deposition, et cetera, et cetera? Is that true?
In the resolution as the majority drafted, HRES 660, only in the Judiciary
Well, that
portion.
was my second question. So I'm assuming that, yes, the answer is yes, he has it in the Judiciary Committee. Does he have it in the Intelligence Committee?
As the majority has drafted the resolution, the president has no ability to ask any questions or call any witnesses in the Intelligence.
Does he have it in any other of the committees that have been pursuing impeachment inquiry?
As HRES 660 is drafted, mentioning financial services, foreign affairs, judiciary, oversight, reform, ways and means, and intelligence, the president has no ability to participate in any way in any of those committees.
And to my friend's best recollection or knowledge, was that the case for President Clinton or President Nixon? I mean, were they represented in the Committee of Jurisdiction where the hearings were taking place?
Well, again, the majority can draft it as they see fit, but your vision is mine. HRES 581, as passed by the Republican House in 1998, only named one committee of jurisdiction. In that one committee, gave the president and his counsel full ability to participate. In fact, as I recall, there were only 4 hearings held 3 of them were held at the House's request. One of them was held at President Clinton's request, calling only President Clinton's witnesses at that time.
And so that wouldn't be possible under this procedure.
It would be impossible in all of those committees that I have.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
No,
Chairman.
I would just say before I yield to Ms. Lesko that if I remember correctly, Ken Starr did the investigation under Clinton, and then that report was then sent to the Judiciary Committee, where the president had rights. Here, the Intelligence Committee is doing the investigation. So in any event, Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to say that I support Representative Woodall's amendment, and for some of the same reasons that were already mentioned, but I kind of went line by line through this, and the title of Section 2 is very misleading. It says open and transparent investigative proceedings. This is not open and transparent in the Intelligence Committee. I mean, all it's doing is saying we're going to do the same thing. In fact, I'm on page 2 and lines 15 through 17, and it says require an open hearing, and which was stated before. That could be one open hearing. We don't know how many closed-door hearings there are going to be from now on, that nobody, including myself, who's a member of the Judiciary Committee, can even attend. And the other thing is that it still allows Chairman Schiff to instruct witnesses not to answer Republican questions. So that came out yesterday. I mean, one of the Republican members asked a question of the witness, and Mr. Schiff told the witness, don't answer that question. I mean, that's just wrong. And then on page 3, I have lines 21 through 25. It also lets Chairman Schiff determines if Republican witnesses' requests are relevant. I mean, that's not fair. How about on page 4, lines 1 through 4? It says basically that Representative Nunes, the ranking member in Intelligence, needs permission of Chairman Schiff to subpoena witnesses, unlike what has happened in the Nixon and Clinton impeachment hearing.
Will the gentlelady yield?
And I will when I'm done. Thank you. And then on page 5, lines 3 forward, I wrote, Chairman Schiff is not required to make public all transcripts. He can pick and choose, or he can choose not to make any transcripts public. And then Adam Schiff determines what he deems appropriate to include in his report. I mean, if you think this is fair, this is not fair at all. And so the title of this is really misleading to the American public. I went to that Storm the Ship.
Right.
I was one of
Ship,
the people.
right.
Now, I did not go inside because I actually had a bill in Homeland Security Committee to go to. But I also went previously and asked, can I see testimony? Can I see testimony? I'm a member of the Judiciary Committee, and I'm going to be voting on this in Judiciary Committee, yet I can't even see the testimony, as has been done in both Republican and Democrat leadership in the past under the Nixon and Clinton impeachments, where it was done in the Judiciary Committee. It was open. It was open to the public, and you said Ken Starr.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, he's an independent counsel. I'm sorry, Adam Schiff is not an independent counsel. In fact, he has made repeated statements over and over and over again that he wants to impeach the president. He's very biased.
Last time I checked, DOJ didn't appoint a special counsel in this matter, so we're left to do it. I just will point out to the gentlewoman that I'm looking at the resolution here. It says the chair of the Permanent Select Committee shall designate an open hearing or hearings pursuant to the section. Under the Woodall Amendment, you strike that, and we maintained the status quo. So I think I would urge a no vote on the Woodall Amendment.
Mr. Chairman, just make sure we're on the same page. You would also agree that the status quo is that the chairman of the Intelligence Committee can open up have as many public hearings as he would like. The requirement that he have at least one is new. The opportunity to have them all be open is present today without this resolution.
Well, in my opening statement, I went through why some of these hearings have to be closed. I also went through a list of all the things that the White House has not cooperated with Congress on, and I'm really a little bit stunned that members of Congress aren't more upset about the fact that, that our constitutional rights are being totally ignored by this president. But having said all of that, I would urge a no vote on the Woodall amendment. Any other comments? If not, the vote is on the Woodall amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, can I get a roll call vote?
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings? No. Mrs. Torres? No. Mrs. Torres? No. Mr. Perlmutter? No. Mr. Perlmutter? No. Mr. Raskin? No. Mr. Raskin? No. Ms. Scanlon?
No.
Ms. Scanlon? No. Mr. Morelli? No. Mr. Morelli? No. Ms. Shalala? No. Ms. Shalala? No. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. DeSaulnier? No. Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Woodall?
Aye.
Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Burgess?
Aye.
Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mrs. Lesko? Aye. Mrs. Lesko? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk, report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Any further amendments? Mr. Burgess.
Thank you. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 2 to House Resolution 660, offered by Mr. Burgess. Page 1, line 2, strike financial services. Page 1, beginning line 3, strike oversight and reform and ways and means, and insert oversight and reform.
Am I recognized on the?
The gentleman is recognized. I'm sorry.
So, as you heard, this amendment strikes references to the Committee on Financial Services and the Committee on Ways and Means in Section 1 of the resolution. To me, it is unclear why these two committees are included in the list of committees directed to continue the ongoing impeachment investigations, because the only reason for including these committees in the impeachment investigation is to access President Trump's personal business papers and his IRS papers. We know that Democrats have sought this information since the time that this president was nominated by his party in July of 2016, and that crusade has been relentless ever since. However, the goal is beyond the scope of this whistleblower complaint that led to the announcement of the impeachment inquiry. This is continuing a fishing expedition to see if we can't find something on which to impeach the president. It is not part of the complaint that I believe Mr. Schiff has brought to us surrounding the whistleblower. So no reason to include these committees in the impeachment investigation. I'm sure they'll welcome us giving them the time back that would otherwise be consumed by this, and really this is nothing more than a fishing expedition to see if they can't uncover something else that might be useful to them should the whistleblower complaint fail, which I believe it will.
Thank you very much. Some people call it a fishing expedition like you. Others call it congressional oversight. I want to yield to Mr. Perlmutter, who's also on the...
So I would just say to my friend from Texas that this is not a fishing expedition. In fact, the federal courts have said to the administration and to President Trump, turn over the documents. Turn over the documents on your tax returns, and turn over the documents related to Deutsche Bank as it pertains to any monies that came from Russia. And despite orders to turn over those documents by the federal courts, the administration continues to withhold them. And so I would say to the gentleman, this is not a fishing expedition. If anything, it's an obstruction but in turning over documents legitimate to the review by this Congress.
Does the executive branch not continue to have appellate rights on those court decisions? This is still being litigated, as I understand it, is it not?
The orders from the D.C. Circuit and from the federal court in New York have been entered, and the gentleman, the administration continues to appeal, you're right.
They continue to exercise their right to judicial review under the Constitution.
They do. And we continue to request those documents, and the orders so far are to turn them over.
However, the administration has asserted its right to have that litigation continue and to appeal those decisions, and I expect, and you're the lawyer in the room, I'm not, but I would expect that will go to the highest court in the land.
And the gentleman may be right, and it is the Congress's prerogative that you're trying to strike by your amendment, that we discontinue that. And so I would say to the gentleman that I'm going to certainly vote against your amendment, because these requests, which have in effect been supported by the courts, are legitimate, and the requests that we've made continue to pursue are legitimate.
If the gentleman will yield, I would just simply point out that this process has already been enjoined, and the president is exercising his appellate rights, as is his right, as would any other citizen have that right, and there's no reason to exclude that right from the president. When the case is finally litigated, you may get what you desire, you may not. But I don't see the value in including it in this resolution that we're hearing today. It's almost as if we want to give our blessing to perhaps further the case against the president of the courts. I don't think that's the purpose of this resolution.
And I appreciate the gentleman's thoughts. There is value here, and certainly the continued pursuit of these documents is within the prerogative of the Congress, and that's why I would ask my colleagues to vote no on your amendment.
Mr. Raskin.
Yeah, just to echo Mr. Perlmutter's point, under Article 1, we can shape our impeachment investigation however we like. And so oversight is part of it, and Ways and Means are part of it, because they have relevant evidence to bring forward, and all of them will be sending evidence to the Judiciary Committee of potential high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, to put your mind at rest, I believe that the litigation relating to the president's taxes took place before there was an impeachment investigation. I don't think it's related to the impeachment investigation, which isn't to say we couldn't request it, but so far I don't believe it's been requested as part of the impeachment investigation. So, look, some presidents would take only one committee to investigate their potential high crimes and misdemeanors. Other presidents may need multiple committees to be working on all of their high crimes and misdemeanors. So if it's a fishing expedition, there are a lot of fish, and there might even be some whales out in the water there, and I also would resist this amendment.
Gentlemen, yield for a question?
Sure.
Why then is not this information turned over to the Judiciary Committee as it is in the other portions of the resolution?
Wait, which?
The Ways and Means and Financial Services findings.
So is there something that prohibits them from turning the
All the
evidence over?
committees are instructed to turn their
I thought that was precisely how it's set up.
They're authorized to.
I-
They're authorized
If
to.
I could just get pointed out for me, the page and line.
I think that the precise point of
Page
doing
six.
this is to say that all of the investigatory committees will turn over their evidence to the Judiciary Committee, which will have the difficult job of synthesizing the potential high crimes and misdemeanors of this administration.
Mr.
McGovern?
Oh, yeah,
I yield back.
Mr. Hastings, that's you.
I always learn from Mr.
All right,
Hastings. I would be
Mr.
happy for him to.
Well, I just want to lift from the amendment as offered by Dr. Burgess to strike line 1 and also line 3, dealing with oversight and reform and Ways and Means and oversight and reform, as it says. The language in the resolution reflects the following. That the various committees that are identified have ongoing investigations as part of the existing House of Representatives inquiry into whether sufficient grounds exist for the House of Representatives to exercise this constitutional power to impeach the President of the United States. Those ongoing investigations are what are relevant at this particular time, and they will all, once completed, be turned over to the Judiciary Committee.
That then, when they reach their conclusions, then perhaps we would consider another such resolution, but to include them at this point, when it is not part of the whistleblower complaint, to me, it has the effect of broadening the scope in a way where the president has no means of defending himself against these allegations in really any of these committees.
Dr. Burgess, when was the last time you saw a crime suspect in a grand jury?
I can't tell you that, I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Yeah, I can tell you.
Proceedings.
That simply doesn't occur. What we have to take into consideration here is that.
Are people being impeached by grand juries these days?
No, but I'm likening the
Well, you
grand
can
jury
liken it to the
process.
procedure,
to
but this is a unique
particular
procedure.
process. Of course it is. And it was unique in President Nixon's impeachment. It was unique in President Clinton's impeachment. And here again, matters have evolved. The president will get his due if there are articles of impeachment. And that's what I find passing strange, that you all seem to accelerate it to the point of there are articles of impeachment where clearly the resolution reflects that he will have full responsibilities that he can discharge in that particular undertaking.
I would just remind the gentleman, and I think this is an important point, we are setting precedent for the future. Be careful with what you do.
And that's a good thing.
Mr. Woodall?
I knew I would value my friend from Florida speaking before me, because he does always speak from years of experience. These do reference the ongoing investigations that are going on in each of these committees. My friend on the Financial Services Committee spoke eloquently of the work that's already going on. There are no new authorities provided in this resolution to any of those committees. No new authorities provided to any of those committees in this resolution. Oversight is our constitutional right. We do not need an HRES to give it to us. Historically, when we begin to talk about impeachment inquiries, the investigations have happened, and the Judiciary Committee begins that process. The one who's putting the cart before the horse is the one who still thinks 8 committees need to be investigating this because they haven't dug up whatever the smoking gun is they were looking for yet. This resolution provides opportunities for the president and his counsel to be involved, as always happens in an inquiry. But it does that in one committee and one committee only. If this is that stage of the process where one committee and one committee only is investigating the collective work product of all of the other committees, then my amendment should have been accepted, and we should have this process going on in the Judiciary Committee. If all of these other committees are involved in a way that needs to guarantee fairness to the process, and you'd like to provide the president and his counsel a role in that, we would in fact need a resolution to provide the Article 2 folks an opportunity to participate. But you are not choosing to do that. And what's passing strange is that this purports to be the official beginning of the impeachment inquiry, which purports to affirm the continuing existing impeachment authority, which purports to provide fairness and opportunity to the president, but not in any of these first 7 committees that are working now. But if and when it ever gets to the Judiciary Committee, we might give you a shot at the apple. Then that's the
yield
I'd be happy to yield.
Yeah, I just am curious. You are mindful that during all of these proceedings that have taken place, as well as those that are proposed under this resolution, that the minority party is present and accounted for, if they choose, through counsel and their own inquiries. 1/3 of all of the respective committees identified here have members of the Republican Party on them. You are aware of that?
I am aware that tells half the story. As you just heard from our friend from Arizona, you don't have to look past the last 24 hours to find opportunities that those same Republican members that you're talking about, who absolutely have a seat at the table, had the audacity to use their voice at that table to ask a question, only to be shut down by the chairman of that committee.
And let me say something about that. That shouldn't even be being discussed here. And let me send a word out to all of the members of the Intelligence Committee, as well as those committees that are on these respective committees. Matters ongoing before those committees are to be left in secret. Loose lips sink ships. They have a sign down there that tells you that. And we've had absolutely too much talk and too little action here. All of the process that I hear you all arguing about doesn't address the possibility that this president has committed high crimes and misdemeanors.
And I just want to correct the record. You said that this resolution purports to begin the impeachment inquiry. The impeachment inquiry has already begun.
I apologize.
That's okay. I just
I
wanted
thought
to set
that
the record straight.
well, impeachment is the power of the House.
Right.
And this is the House resolution on which we're voting. I understand that various partisan chairmen are doing
Right, yeah.
the work of partisanship, but this is the House speaking on impeachment.
Well, Ms. Lesko she wants to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say something about what Mr. Hastings just said. And I agree with you. Everything should be kept secret. Unfortunately, I keep reading what's going on, selectively leaked, I assume, by the Democrat chairman or the Democratic staff of the Intel Committee, because I don't even know that the leak is the right word. It's just given to the New York Times. I'm reading about stuff that I, as a member of Judiciary Committee, can't even hear the testimony of these people. Yet it's just given to apparently to the New York Times. I mean, that's not right either.
The vote is on the Woodall amendment.
No, it's a Burgess amendment.
I'm sorry, the Burgess amendment.
That may make people more inclined to vote favorably.
We'll try. Yeah, all those in favor of the Burgess amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, no. Mrs. Torres? Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter? Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin? Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli? Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala? Ms. Shalala, no. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall?
Aye.
Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess?
Aye.
Mr. Burgess, aye. Mrs. Lesko? Aye. Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Further amendments.
Yes, I have an amendment.
Mr. Burgess.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment number 3 to House Resolution 660, offered by Mr. Burgess. Page 6, line 2, insert A before the chair. Page 6, after line 7.
I ask unanimous consent that the amendment be considered.
Without objection. Mr.
So
Burgess.
this amendment, again, requires the Committee on Financial Services, the Committee on Ways and Means, to produce documents detailing the nature and scope of their investigations and make them available to all members who ultimately will be required to render a decision on this matter. Again, it is unclear why these two committees are included in the list of committees directed to continue ongoing impeachment investigations. The only reason for including these committees is an attempt to uncover an impeachable offense in President Trump's tax returns. These committees need to define for the House of Representatives and for the American people the nature and scope of their investigations as they relate to the impeachment inquiry, an inquiry which was officially declared to investigate a whistleblower complaint regarding foreign assistance.
You heard the Burgess. Any comments or? Hearing none, the vote is on the Burgess amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
And I'll ask for a roll call.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings?
No.
Mr. Hastings, no. Mrs. Torres? Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter? Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin? Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli? Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala? Ms. Shalala, no. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall?
Aye.
Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess?
Aye.
Mr. Burgess, aye. Mrs. Lesko? Aye. Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Further amendments.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Woodall.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 4 to House Resolution 660, offered by Mr. Woodall. Page 5, insert after line 25 the following. the Chair of the Committee on Rules shall submit additional procedures for proceedings pursuant to this resolution for printing in the congressional record, including such procedures as to allow for the participation of the President and his counsel. At the end of the following, Section 5, impeachment inquiry procedures and other committees. For the purpose of continuing the investigation described in the first section of this resolution, the Committee on Foreign Affairs and the Committee on Oversight and Reform are authorized to conduct proceedings pursuant to procedures as the Chair of the Committee on Rules shall submit for printing in the congressional record, including such procedures as to allow for the participation of the President and his counsel.
Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize for using the committee's time. I wanted the clerk to read the entire amendment because while I vociferously object to setting the new precedent of using all of these committees in this circumstance, I acknowledge I lost that amendment. And so what this does is saying, fine, if you want to do not just a bifurcated or trifurcated, I don't know what a seven-way split is, thank you, Doctor, that in the same way that the majority is authorizing the Rules Committee to create a list of procedures by which the President has an opportunity and his counsel to participate in the in the activities of the Judiciary Committee, to also ask the chairman, in his wisdom, to create that same set of procedures so that the President and his counsel can participate only in activities as it relates to the authorized scope of the impeachment investigation, participate in those other committees as well. That sounds like such an obvious yes to a bipartisan vote. I knew you wouldn't believe me if I described it on my own. So I wanted the clerk to read it word for word. It simply says, exactly as we've asked the chairman of the Rules Committee in his wisdom to create an opportunity for fair play and due process in the Judiciary Committee, we will also ask the chairman of the Rules Committee to create an opportunity for fair play and due process in the other committees. And I thank the chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Any discussion or Mr. Perlmutter?
Yeah, so I'm going to read these too. So Article 1, Section 2.5 of the Constitution of the United States of America, the House of Representatives shall choose their Speaker and other officers and shall have the sole power of impeachment. Then 3.7, Article 1, Section 3.7, judgment in cases of impeachment shall, 3.6, the Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachment. So let's just go back to basics, to Civics 101. The impeachment is the complaint against the President. It isn't the trial. The trial is in the Senate, in which case the Senate creates its own rules by which it will determine whether the President is getting due process or not getting due process. But the complaint, the impeachment, the indictment against the President is what we do. And so to the degree you want to have more due process, the due process is part of the trial. And so, listening to everybody talk about, well, it's just not fair. What has been happening, because this is something like a grand jury coming up with a complaint or an indictment, but it allows for Republicans to ask questions and Democrats to ask questions in the process of developing a complaint in an area where it seems like national security is really at stake, and issues of the intelligence community is at stake. And so to the degree that my friends, Mr. Woodall, Ms. Lesko, Dr. Burgess, are complaining that there's no process, that it's not fair, Republicans are getting to ask questions, Democrats are getting to ask questions, it's in an arena involving the intelligence community, there will be an open process in the Judiciary Committee, and there will be a trial if impeachment is authorized in the Senate. So I would also suggest to my friends that they be taking up some of their questions about due process with the Senate, where the trial actually takes place.
Would my friend yield?
Sure.
As is so often true, I don't disagree with a thing that my friend said. Though when this House considered its role in impeachment, in the Nixon impeachment, we decided collectively that fairness and due process required that the president and his council have a role in that. When we did the.
And I thank the gentleman, and I reclaim my time, but between Archibald Cox and Leon Jaworski, the special prosecutors that had been appointed to, in effect, do the grand jury phase of the investigation, that was separate and apart, and then the information, including everything but the missing 19 minutes, was delivered to the Congress for discussion and development and determination whether impeachment was appropriate. And then articles of impeachment were then brought to the floor of the House, where some were voted yes and some were voted no.
Would my friend yield further?
Of course.
I understand the history to be exactly as my friend from Colorado described it. That's just not what we're purporting to do here today. If the Ways and Means Committee wants to go and gather information to then turn over to the Judiciary Committee to pursue an impeachment inquiry, they don't need this committee and this resolution to do that. They're out there doing their oversight work as the Constitution requires every single day of the week. This resolution purports to do something new, that to begin that process. As I read the resolution, all of these other committees can do their work. The primary ones can do that work in almost total secrecy. It can then be turned over to the Judiciary Committee, rubber stamped at the end. The process you described had the full-throated discussion.
Let me reclaim my time. Let me reclaim my time. So I guess you're saying, well, you don't really need this to go do what you're doing in the financial services and the Ways and Means, but certainly I think this gives some responsibility to our committee, the Rules Committee, to say, as you're going about these investigations, because they are ongoing at this time too, we want you to turn those pieces of information over. And so I think, in effect, this would be something you would want in addition to what their oversight responsibilities are today.
But would the gentleman yield?
Sure.
Just to elaborate that final point, I have to admit I'm a little bit baffled because from our colleagues across the aisle for the last several weeks, all we've heard is you're in a process, but you haven't had a vote. Well, now we're going to have a vote. Then we hear, well, we want open hearings. This is a process for open hearings. That's precisely what we're doing. And now we're getting the objection, you could have done this without a vote. Well, yes, we were doing without a vote. You guys wanted a vote. We're going to have a vote. We're going to make it perfectly clear what's going on here. And it's going to be open hearings. So it seems like what we're getting more and more of is complaints about process. And they do seem to be flipping back and forth on different sides. And it almost seems as if we don't want to deal with the substance of the president's conduct. And I can understand that. But we do have an Article I branch responsibility, all of us, to pursue high crimes and misdemeanors, offenses against America.
Wouldn't my friend from Maryland yield?
But it's not my time, but I yield back.
All right. Mr. Cole.
Okay, I just have a question from my friend from Georgia, maybe a couple questions. Number one, why do you think we have the president's attorneys with certain rights inside the Judiciary Committee?
Because my constituents want the work product to be not a partisan work product. They want it to be open and honest.
To make the process appear fair.
That's exactly what they want.
If that's fair, why is it, why are the other committees not given, the president have the same right, since they're developing the very basis for impeachment? And to my friend's point, a debate over process, that's what the Rules Committee is. That's what this is. This is a resolution about process.
Right.
So we are going to debate process. That's your choice, because you're setting up a process. So, please, no more complaints about debating about process when that's what the resolution is. It sets forward a process. But to my friend, again, do you think it's going to strike your constituents as being unfair that in multiple committees, pursuing the president will not have an attorney, will not have any sorts of rights? Well, in many cases, they can be held in secret.
I am told that this is the official House position on impeachment, and we are offering the president a role in 1 out of 6 committees mentioned here.
Thank you.
Well, and let me just say, finally, before we call the question, and I've explained this several times, but it's not getting through, I don't think. But what's unique about this particular situation is we don't have a Ken Starr. We don't have a special prosecutor building the case, right? These committees are building the case. It will be turned over to the Judiciary Committee. The President has been afforded all kinds of rights before the Judiciary Committee. This is a fair process, and it is an open and transparent process. This, we're at the next stage here. The gathering of the evidence is coming to a close. It is now time to present the evidence to the Judiciary Committee and to the American people, and here is the roadmap. And we're going to explain it. We're having an open hearing here today, and we're explaining how we're going to do this, and I think it's a good process. With that, the question is on the Woodall. Ms. Lesko would like to add something.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this amendment. I just disagree with you. This is not, what you have set forth here is not an open and fair process, because you're giving some of the rights that were afforded to Nixon and Clinton under both Republican and Democrat leadership in just the Judiciary Committee. But there's a huge difference. Under those impeachment hearings, it was all done in the Judiciary Committee hearing, and you were able to have, the President was able to be there.
And he'll be able to come to the Judiciary Committee if he wants.
Yes, but there was no closed-door meetings. I mean, you're comparing Representative Adam Schiff to an independent counsel, Ken Starr. That's just, it's not the same. I mean, Ken Starr, I don't think, went out and for 2 years claimed he had proof that President Trump colluded with Russia, and then that turned out to be false in the Mueller report. And I don't think Ken Starr went on TV and said, no, our office never had any previous conversation with the whistleblower complaint, and that turned out to be untrue. I mean, you're comparing apples and oranges, and I just don't think that's fair. And in addition, in these closed-door hearings, Republican members that are supposed to be allowed in those committees, they're on those committees, they've told me that if, let's say they have to step out for a minute to go do other business, that they can't even get the transcripts. And that in order to do it, they have to go in front of a Democrat member, and like they're being babysat by the Democrat member. This is just not fair.
Well, we're going to have to agree to disagree, but I want to say for the record, Trey Gowdy, a Republican, said of the Select Committee on Benghazi's interviews, quote, "The private ones always produce the better results," end quote. Greg Nunziata, former Republican Senate Judiciary Committee counsel, said, quote, "People should know that closed-door depositions and interviews by bipartisan staff, which is what is happening now, are absolutely routine in congressional investigations. This is normal. It helps Congress put together a factual record." He went on to add, "Republicans are," and I quote, "wrong to suggest there is something nefarious or illegitimate about what is being done here. It is normal operating procedure, and a record is being built," end quote. I mean, even Trey Gowdy said the same thing during the Benghazi investigation about prematurely releasing transcripts. Quote, "Releasing transcripts can impact the recollections of other witnesses, jeopardize the efficacy of the investigation, alert witnesses to lines of inquiry best not made public, and publicize personal information." Look, at the bottom, I think we disagree. The bottom line is we want to get to the truth. And I think what we're seeing here are attempts to try to find ways to be able to delay us getting to the truth, or actually blocking us from getting to the truth. And I think that there's just a fundamental difference here. We are genuinely horrified by the lack of cooperation from this White House on any of these investigations. We are deeply disturbed by what we are hearing each and every day coming out of the various committees. And so we believe that we need to get a process in place to get the evidence out there, and people can decide. I mean, this is not this is not a hearing on whether the president should be impeached. That will be determined at some other point. This is a hearing on trying to get a process in place that I think is transparent, that has dignity, that respects this institution, and that is what we're doing.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Torres. No? Okay. Mr. Burgess?
Mr. Chairman, if you just yield for a question, I don't recall if my good friend Mr. Gowdy ever prevented the Democratic members from questioning the witnesses.
And I don't think anybody is preventing Republican members who are on the committees of questioning witnesses. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you're talking about.
But if they instruct the witness not to answer, that's preventing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, but, all right. The question is on the Burgess Amendment. No, Woodall, Mr., on the Woodall amendment, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Opinion chair, the noes have it. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings? No. Mrs. Torres? No. Mrs. Torres? No. Mr. Perlmutter? No. Mr. Perlmutter? No. Mr. Raskin? Mr. Raskin? No. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon? No. Mr. Morelli? Mr. Morelli? No. Ms. Shalala? Ms. Shalala? No. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. DeSaulnier? No. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mrs. Lesko? Mrs. Lesko? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Further amendments. Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk designated Cole number 5.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 5 to House Resolution 660, offered by Mr. Cole. Page 3, beginning on line 5, strike only and all that follows through periods of questioning. On line 9.
I'd ask we
and-
dispense with the reading.
Without objection.
Thank you very much,
Gentleman's
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's a significant deviation from historical precedent, and frankly, I think silly, to tell a member of Congress that they can yield to an unelected staff member, but they can't yield to another member on the very committee they're on. I mean, that's just common practice around here. So my amendment simply restores the right of members to yield their time to any member of their choosing. Absolutely no reason to prohibit the chair and ranking member of the Intelligence Committee from yielding time to anyone but an employee. So, I mean, why you would not let them yield to another member of Congress on the same committee is beyond me. So I would like to restore that right to all the members of the Intelligence Committee. Micromanaging member time, is just, I think, well beyond the scope of what we ought to be doing in this resolution.
I heard the gentleman's amendment. Any discussion? Mr. Woodall.
Mr. Chairman, again, we didn't have the benefit of having a hearing on the resolution, so I don't know why that is in here. It is such a dramatic departure. You've had my Democratic friends yielding me time here on this very contentious issue. It's not just normal to yield time to your colleagues on your side of the aisle. It's a common practice to yield time across the aisle. Surely something as important as an impeachment, the additional 37 seconds one might save by not allowing me to yield that time to a colleague is counterbalanced by a desire for full-throated debate.
Any other?
But my question was for folks who were involved in the drafting of this resolution. I most decidedly was not.
Well, I would say that what is important is that members obviously all will be recognized. All members will be able to ask questions. What this creates is the ability for professional staff to be able to question a witness for a period of time to actually be able to do it effectively. And that's the
If I may, Mr. Chairman, it's my amendment. There's nothing in my amendment that would prohibit doing exactly what you just said. I mean, you certainly could still yield your time to the staff, but we're specifically prohibiting members from yielding time to other members. And I don't know why we would do that. We again, as my friend said, we do that back and forth. We're doing it right now.
Well, like in this committee, if members agree by unanimous consent, they can do whatever they want in these committees.
Well, can you tell us the purpose why you wouldn't allow another member?
I mean, because the purpose of this was to give professional staff the ability to cross-examine witnesses in a way that makes these hearings less of a circus and more focused on the facts.
Well, again, nothing in my amendment would prohibit.
Well, and there's nothing that will prevent anybody in any committee asking unanimous consent to be able to yield. We could agree to disagree on this. Ms. Torres?
Mr. Chairman, we've had a lot of back and forth, and we had Republican members in the depositions that a myth is that they've been excluded from the process. And, I have a lot of respect, for my colleagues here. But the bottom line is that Republicans have been allowed to ask questions. There has been nothing in secret that has been going on in these classified briefings where Republicans have been excluded. If I may finish, what is secret is when you take a transcript of a telephone call and you're so worried about the content and the words that came out of the person's mouth that you have to hide it in a secret file That's offensive. Another myth that the minority has no rights under this democratic process. We will continue to give the minority the same rights to question witnesses as the majority. That is the precedent, and it was true yesterday, and it is true today. It has been true every step of the way, and it will continue to be in this process. Now, I understand that there is a lot of pent-up anger from some Republican members who feel that they have been shut out of participating in these classified briefings. Well, every member of Congress can't serve on this committee. Folks, based on trust and responsibility, have been assigned to serve on this highly classified committee. And folks like me that are not on this committee have been granted this great opportunity to work on other things. And we have worked on many other things because the agenda of the people continues to move forward. So if you're angry that your leader did not allow you to sit on this committee so that you can participate in a process that you want to make a political process, I'm sorry for you. There is nothing in this resolution that is going to make you feel better. And if you would like fair about that process, then I want to invite you to the LA County Fair, where everything is fair. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Cole.
Well, again, I have enormous respect for my good friend. We work together on a lot of issues, but none of that has anything to do with this amendment. The amendment just simply says, can a member yield his time to another member on a committee? Why are we
And the
prohibiting?
answer is yes, if they get unanimous consent to do so.
We don't need unanimous consent to yield on any committee that I've ever sat on. We don't do it here.
I mean, the gravity of what what we're talking about here today is unbelievable. I mean, this is a very serious matter. We can spend a lot of time on things like this, but there's, if there's unanimous consent in the committee, members could do whatever they want to do. And and so I don't really have anything else to say, but Mr. Woodall would like to say something.
Again, I've been on the Rules Committee. I've not been on a lot of authorizing committees. I thought we specifically created the 90 minutes in this resolution because it is not easy for committees just to up and create extra time like that. And what this language does, and again, I've not seen it before, it allows me to yield time to my friend Don Sisson as a professional staff member, but won't allow me to yield time to an elected member of Congress.
Well, you can if you get unanimous consent, but let me just say this for the record, as chair of the Rules Committee with no time limits here, giving members more time is a little bit overrated.
This isn't
So,
more time.
Just telling you.
This isn't more time. It's the statutory amount of time. And I would,
Yeah, they will get their normal time. I mean, they're not saying they're not going to get any time. Anyway, if you want to continue this, we can. If not, we'll call the vote question on the Cole Amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Being chair, the noes have it. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mrs. Torres? Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter? Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin? No. Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli? Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala? No. Ms. Shalala, no. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mrs. Lesko? Aye. Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will call the, report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will read the Lesko amendment.
And I, with unanimous consent, dispense of the reading.
Without objection.
Mr. Chair, as currently written, this resolution says that the minority witness request will be reviewed. However, there is no guarantee minority rights will be honored and Republican witness requests will be granted. Therefore, my amendment simply would allow the minority to call an equal amount of witnesses as the majority. This will ensure this process is handled in a fair, just fashion.
We heard the Lesko amendment. Is there discussion? Mr. Raskin?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong opposition to this amendment, and it gives us the opportunity to clear up, I think, a misperception that somehow the minority in the Clinton and Nixon cases had unilateral subpoena power. They did not. It was always possible for the majority in either of those cases to prevent a witness from being called or a subpoena to be issued. We're actually offering precisely the same powers to the minority that have been extended in prior impeachments. And in fact, in some ways, the president gets more powers under our resolution than the president had in prior impeachments. In our case, the president will receive a copy of the Statement of Information and related documents and evidence. That took place in Nixon. Actually, it didn't take place in Clinton. Clinton did not have the benefit of a presentation of evidence because the majority at that point essentially just took the Ken Starr report and turned that into its evidence in the case. He didn't have the opportunity to cross-examine any of the witnesses against him. In the Nixon case, the president and his counsel were invited to attend the presentation of evidence, and we do that as well. In the Nixon case, the president's counsel could not ask questions at the presentation of evidence, but in our case, we are allowing the president's counsel to ask questions at the presentation of evidence. The president's counsel in the Nixon case could respond to the presentation of evidence, and again here, and right down the line, we have essentially followed what's taken place before, except, as mentioned, the president gets more powers here. But the suggestion that the minority had a unilateral subpoena power and could issue subpoenas without the consent of a majority of the committee is just wrong. The way it was set up before was that the chair and the ranking member could act together to issue subpoenas. If they disagreed, one could go forward unless a majority of the committee opposed it. And that always gave the majority the power to block a minority subpoena. So I would oppose this resolution, which would endow the minority with powers that it never had before in a prior impeachment. I yield back.
Ms. Lesko?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, I think we need to investigate this further because I actually have differing information. And it says that, please note that under the previous impeachment rules, the ranking member could unilaterally issue a subpoena so long as the chair did not object.
Would the lady yield?
Under Clinton and Nixon, there was an option for chair to not join. So I think there's a nuanced difference that I need to
I can read to you the actual language if you're interested. I don't know where you're reading from. Where is that? Where are you reading from?
I'm reading from an email I got from staff.
Okay. But I have the actual language, which I'm happy to read, where we can provide it to you, and, you know.
Why don't we insert it in the record with unanimous consent?
Okay, I'd love to submit it to the record, Mr. Chair.
All right, no further discussion?
No.
Oh, Mr. Morelli.
If I can, Mr. Chair, first of all, I want to thank you for bringing forward the resolution in chief that ensures certainty and transparency in the next phase of the impeachment inquiry into the president and urge defeat of the amendment. I'm deeply troubled, as I think we all are, that this process has become necessary at all and that the House has had to investigate alarming allegations of misconduct. However, I am grateful they were ready to set forward the next steps of the impeachment inquiry, one in which all parties are guaranteed the ability to participate in fact-finding, in which the public will have the ability to access and to assess for themselves the evidence. And I know my constituents back in Rochester, New York, are grateful that this resolution will allow the House Intelligence Committee to release public transcripts of the depositions that have already taken place while maintaining caution to protect classified and sensitive information. The public phase of this inquiry will allow precedent on the gathering of information, witnesses, and documents, as well as the advancement of articles of impeachment, should that be necessary through the Judiciary Committee. This has not been, and I appreciate the eloquence of my friend, Mr. Raskin, and I want to associate myself with his remarks, but this has not been and will not be controlled by the Democratic majority in the House Republican members and leadership have the opportunity to question witnesses, seek evidence, and refute any testimony presented during these proceedings. And the process outlined today will continue to expand, as Mr. Raskin has indicated, the protections for the president seen under the Nixon and Clinton inquiries, including express rules in the resolution allowing the President's counsel to ask questions and offer a concluding presentation, which I don't believe was in the previous investigations. These have not been guaranteed, and I'm not sure I agree. Mr. Raskin, I'd love to know where the information comes from Ms. Lesko has presented. My understanding is they have not been guaranteed in past impeachment proceedings, and I hope that both sides can see that we are committed to a fair and open process with the goals of discovering the truth and protecting the American public. This is a solemn occasion.
Thank you.
And it is our obligation nonetheless, and I urge my colleagues to join me in defeating the amendment and supporting the resolution so we can uphold our oath to the Constitution and provide a transparent process on behalf of the American public.
Thank you. The vote now will be on the Lesko amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mrs. Torres? No. Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter? No. Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin? No. Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli? Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala? No. Ms. Shalala, no. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mrs. Lesko? Aye. Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. I want to inform the committee that there's a series of 10 votes that have been called on the House floor. So members are asked to vote and return at the start of the last vote. So without objection, the committee stands at recess until the beginning of the last vote.
Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Say microphone check.
Not today. I got enough. Yeah, thank you.
That's a good point. I mean, give it a while, you should tell us. You're like the second person to talk about that. You have to get it. No, it's just, it used to be an hour late. At least you would have.